I'm going to show you how to go back and pick up a row you've already worked. This is really useful if you find a mistake you made on a prior row that you no longer have a shed stick in holding, and so you can just re-pick up that whole row even if there's nothing in there holding it. This will be part of several videos I'm going to do on finding and correcting mistakes in your sprung. And I'm not going to talk much about the mistake that I put into this warp. I'm just going to show you how to come back and pick up the row above it. But just really quickly, you can see that there's a mistake because I have this front thread here that just is kind of been floating along and hasn't been picked up and worked. And it's a little confusing because if you're looking at your sprung, so if you pull it open like this, you'll see that the rest of the sprung has been done correctly. And this is just because what I did was right here, I accidentally picked up a pair of front threads out of order. And sometimes even the smallest mistake can cause rather large problems like this. Now, if you didn't want to go back and fix it, you could just remove this piece of thread from your work and just live with this one little mistake right here. But if you want to go back and fix it, then you can pick up the prior row onto a shed stick and continue working from there. So I'm going to get in a little bit closer on this so you can better see the mistake and you can better see me picking up the row. Okay, so you can see a little better here the mistake that I made. You can see it right there, and you can tell because it doesn't look like the surrounding areas. You can just kind of see these threads are a little clumped together. And I made it on this row right here, which is 1, 2, 3 rows down, so it's the number 3 row. So in order to correct this mistake, I am going to pick up the row prior to it, this one here, which is number 2 row, and then continue working from there. So to pick up the row, I'm going to use a shed stick like this, and because all of my shed sticks are actually skewers that are pointed on one end like this will work really well for picking up each of the threads. If you are not using skewers like this, or if your skewers are not nice and smooth, if you feel that it might accidentally catch on one of the threads, then go ahead and use a knitting needle. A knitting needle will work really well. Make sure it's not too big. And if it's metal, it'll slide through really nicely. And you can also use bamboo if you don't want it to be so slippery. Okay, so I'm going to actually remove this shed stick. I still have my bottom shed stick in. You can't see it, it's off screen. You could also, before you do this, tie a safety string onto your loom. So tie it to one side of your loom, pass it through this middle shed, and tie it to the other side of the loom. Just so that if something goes wrong and you want to just get back to where you were, you can quickly do so with that safety string. So you can see my rows are all very even, so it's really going to be very easy to pick this row up. Your rows may not be as even, so go slow, and even if you're not sure if you're picking up the right row, continue picking it up, and then you can reassess after you picked it up if you have everything done right. So we can see that the first front thread of this row is this one right here. So I'm just going to slide my shed stick right underneath there, making sure not to split this yarn, which is very easily splittable. And now if I pull apart the work a little bit, you can see that the next front thread that needs to be picked up is that one right there. I find it easiest to pull the work apart, but you don't have to. You could just continually pick up without pulling it apart. But if you're working with a smaller gauge thread or something a little bit more complicated, you might want to go ahead and pull apart your work so that you can definitely be sure you're picking up the correct next thread. So how do I know that this one is the correct one, next one, and not this one or that one? So first of all, there's the obvious, if you keep your shed stick nice and parallel here, so you're topped out, then you're going to stay right along this same row. Now, if your rows are a little skewed, then you want to try and align your shed stick with your row as much as possible. And then if you really need to double check and make sure you're picking up the correct next front thread, take a look at the thread that you just picked up. So we're looking at this guy right here. And then we follow him down to where it interlinks right here. Then follow the thread it just interlinked with back up and look to see where it interlinks. And it should interlink just above our next front thread. All right, so we'll pick that one up and I'll explain that again real quick. Okay, so we just picked up this thread here. Let's see if I can pull this apart a little bit. We just picked up this thread. So look below your shed stick to where it makes an interlinking. So right here, and then follow the thread that it interlinks with up. So there's where it interlinks up here. And we want the thread that it's interlinking with, but we want it below this interlinking. So that was the prior row's interlinking, and that's this row's interlinking. That's the next row's interlinking. So we're just following the thread that our current loop, this one right here, is interlinked with up one, and then we just make sure that we pick up the thread that it interlinked with. Okay, so that's the whole row. And then what you're going to need to do is sort of loosen up all the work below it. And if you're confident that you've picked up the correct rows, you may want to remove your safety string, or you may want to go ahead and wait, but you'll need to, you kind of have to do this twice because you're going to end up with all of this twist is going to build up at your safety string. So just know that you'll do it once here at the top, and then once you're confident that you picked up the right row, you'll need to kind of redo this a little bit after you remove your safety string. Okay, I'm gonna push all that down. And so there is, I just picked up the second row, and I would continue on from here. So I hope that was helpful. I know that was a very short tip and a pretty simple one, but it's very important to know how to find and correct mistakes if they're causing you problems in your pattern. So sometimes our mistakes don't really cause us to have our pattern go off. And in that case, it's just whether or not you don't like the look of the mistake and you want to go back and fix it. But a lot of times mistakes in Sprang are going to cause you a lot of problems as far as you're not going to have the right number of threads at the beginning or the end of your work, or you're going to end up with a split. Sometimes that happens too. So if you need to fix something like that, a lot of times the best thing to do is to just go ahead and take your work all the way back to a point at which it's correct. Now obviously here I only had one row in already, but you might be at a point where you've got a lot more rows than this that were done correctly, and then a few rows that were done incorrectly. And so you can use this to pick up those rows in that way. So I hope this was helpful, and I'm going to be showing some more videos on finding and correcting mistakes in the future weeks. So I'll see you next week.